awake, alert, enthusiastic.
I'm alive, awake,
Awake.
alert,
And
enthusiastic.
Okay. Oh, you know too? Oh, come on, kid, come on up. It's a group event. Yeah. Come on. Take a picture, you guys. Okay, I don't even know the motion, so I'll be the loud voice and you be the motion person. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert. I'm alert, awake, alive. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Hey, okay, one more time. Yes. All right, ready? Get it, Marshall. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert. I'm alert, awake, alive. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Yay! Faster now. Ready? We're gonna go 3 more times and get faster every time. Ready? All right. 1, 2, 3. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert. I'm alert, awake, alive. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Ready? I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert. I'm alert, awake, alive. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Here we go. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I'm alive, awake, alert. I'm alert, awake, alive. I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic.
I could either get the words or the hand motions, but I could not get both. It is November and we are alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. That's right. You're going to be singing that song all day long. All right. I love it. Well, to start today, that was a good comeback. Sorry. To start today, I just want to highlight a couple announcements, some things that have come from precept leaders or a few of you have asked, so I just want to do some clarification. This is now November. We are like rounding the corner, and November goes by even faster than we think because we've got this week off called Thanksgiving, and that's awesome, but then we come back and it's like fly to the end, okay? So let me just highlight a couple things. The 20th, 20, of November, you have a precept paper due to us, okay? Up until now, where have you been giving your precept papers? To your precept leader. Awesome. They've been giving you that. You've been talking about it with other people in your class, in your precept small group. But on the 20th, you can take one that you've done and revise it if you want based on feedback and turn it into us, okay? And then we'll give you feedback and that's what will go into your grade for this course, okay? If you haven't already figured out, there's a rubric at the end of your syllabus and that's how Tim and I will be giving you feedback on the 1 to 5 scale with regard to that, okay? So if you have questions about that, you can email us or stop by. But basically, the precept time is a way to learn it and to get feedback in a safe environment that you're learning, right? This is the time that you only have to turn in that. You have to turn in 1. It doesn't matter what it is, right? On which of the 2 that uses OSMR is about. But that's what we'll give you for feedback, all right? For this month, November, last month in October, we just had you use OSMR. We walked you through that a little bit last time. This time, for your theoretical part, right, for the second move, we want you to use the theory of strengths. So today we're going to introduce that to you, right? You get to pick the scenario that you use, describe that, and then think, how could you, thinking about strengths, look at this situation in a particular way. All right. So Karen's going to help us with that. One other thing I was going to say, the precept paper that you turn into Tim and I comes on the main Moodle site. I know there's been confusion, and this is the first time we're using Moodle, so we're trying to figure out the best way to do this. Your precept is just for you and your precept communication, but when you turn it in anything for grading purposes, it's got to go on the main Moodle site, okay? And there's a link to that. So if you can't find it, let us know. Great. The last thing that I want to say is if you're able to join us for chapel today, and you can do that for those of you online, as well as going to the link to chapel and watch it live. We have a guest. His name is Jim Henderson. And tonight we have a program called No Joke Live. It's Jim heard about the friendship that was developed of 3 clergy in Peoria, Illinois. It was a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian that had come to be friends, and they kind of led their community in some kind of different way of being together. And so he found out that story, wanted to make a documentary on that. He did that a year ago, June, so the June before our election. And what was interesting is he's like, I didn't really know how timely this would be, but out of that, he developed 3 practices around how to talk across difference, not just religious difference, but any kind of difference. And really felt that was something that's kind of a calling that he felt as a Christian leader. He's an evangelical pastor, that he's pastored the church. He's not currently doing that. But that's something that I think we could do better at in our society. And so he really felt a calling to follow this group, partnered with a person that helped do the production and that kind of stuff. And so they produced a book that talks about these 3 practices, did this documentary on them, and now they're going on the road. And tonight, the 3 leaders will be here, but today Jim, the producer, will be here in chapel kind of talking about why is this part of his calling as a Christian public leader, and kind of tell us a little bit about a backstory. So I'm going to help assist, so I'm going to head out a little bit early and get over and get that set up, but we would invite you to join us for that. So with that, I'm turning it over to Dave.
Hello, party people. How is everyone?
Good.
We're going good. Thank you, Karen. I only need one. We're going to talk about our Tov today. Get a little Hebrew lesson. Gotta have some Hebrew. So we need somebody who is comfortable reading in front of a live studio audience that could read this for us. We pass the mic to somebody who's willing to read. Miss Deborah jumping up with her coffee, ready to go.
The whole thing, yeah?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to do this as we get older?
And God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with every seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps upon the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was every evening, and there was morning, the 6th day.
Awesome. Thank you. So God says, yo, I'm going to make some stuff. And when God speaks things into life and God creates these things, God looks at it and sees that it is good. But the word in Hebrew is tov, T-O-V. It's like mazel tov, if you know. That comes from that same root. It's like God looked at it and said, yes, that's what I'm talking about. You want to know my essence? Look at these mountains that I create. There is an indexical relationship between what's been created and the creator. You want to know my majesty? Look at these beautiful human beings I created. And I gave them my spirit. And so if you truly want to understand me, you look at what I've created. And then I believe that God invites us to do the same thing. Amen. So God wants us to bring all of who we are to everything that we do. You want to know who I am? Listen to this CD I created. I put all of who I was and all of my gifts into this CD. You want to know who I am? Watch me do this ballet recital. And just watch how I pour everything that I have into it. And watch how I come alive when I use the gifts that God has given me. So all of us are wired for different things. We're not wired for the same thing. You want to know who I am? Watch how I sit in this meeting with a friend and she talks about herself too much and nobody else is willing to listen to her. And watch how I listen to her with compassion. When you watch me do this, you understand a little bit of the essence. You understand the gifts that God has given you. So Tov is about bringing all of who we are to what we do. So instead of our modus operandi of normally we have do, have, be, right? You do what you can, you get the stuff that you can get so you can be happy, right? Do, have, be. But God invites us into a new way. In this Tov, what happens is we get to be, do, have. So if I'm actually a forgiven, beloved, redeemed child of God, then everything that I do just comes from a place of gratitude. And then what comes from it, what I get from it, that's just icing on the cake. So how do we bring all of who we are to everything that we do? That's what Tov looks like. So my brother is a piano player, and he plays these really intricate pieces like, Franz Liszt, and people I can't really pronounce their names even. That's how good he is. Rachmaninoff. And so when you walk into the room, you'll hear, Rachmaninoff playing in the room, and the room is reverberating with Rachmaninoff. But I would also say that the room is reverberating with my brother's spirit, with my brother's gifts. So when you look at the piano is sitting there, and you look at this little sheet music, and you see these little, this white stuff and these little black dots and lines and things like that. You can tell how technical I am with music. And until he puts his hands on that piano, it's just lines and dots on a page. But when he puts his hands on it, it comes to life. Amen. And so you're gonna get to your first call, and your name is gonna be on an org chart somewhere, and it's just gonna be your name there. But when you put your gifts into that position, suddenly it comes to life. And that's what God invites each of us to do, is to bring who we are to those positions. So, I'm the CPL coordinator. Okay, that's my title here, right? I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm figuring it out. But I'm trying to bring my gifts into that place, and that's what God has called us to do. So Colossians 3 tells us that in whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Whatever your task, put yourselves into it as done for the Lord and not for your masters. So Martin Luther really had a sense of this, right? He really meant whatever you do. He really meant that. If you're a mother, then be a mother, then bring all of who you are to what you do in that mothering. Do it to bring glory to God. If you're a runner, run as hard as you can. If you've ever seen Chariots of Fire, when the main character is explaining to his sister why he's going to... Chariots of Fire, am I dating myself with Chariots of Fire? Okay. Da, 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 da. Okay. He's explaining to his sister, he says, she says, why are you going to be a runner instead of a missionary? And he says, because when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And when we use the gifts that God has given us, we feel God's pleasure. So that's the task, is how do we figure out what we're wired to be and do in this world. So one way to just ask this question, And I think I'll just give you like a real brief minute together to pick one of these questions, attack one or all of these questions if you can, and to try to help you get at your tove. So what makes you come alive when you do it? What was something you did recently where you just lost track of time and space because you enjoyed it so much? What do you do well that you don't remember learning how to do? Like, I've always been a good listener. I never took a class on listening, but for some reason I can show up in a room and I can always listen. So just find a strange person next to you for a moment and see if you can get at what you think one of your toves are in your life. You try that? Are you guys tracking with what tove is? It's like that sweet spot where you bless yourself, others, and God all at the same time when you do what you're wired to do and be who you're wired to be. Ready? Go. 1 minute.
Track your time all the time when I play
Okay. Hold on. All right, you must have a lot of toes here. What is toe for people? So, toe, okay, one more time, just to repeat, because people online are asking. Toe is about bringing all of who you are to what you're doing, and that those things that you say to yourself, I think this might be part of why I'm on this planet. When I'm in this space, when I'm doing this thing, when I'm being this person, this feels right. This feels like God is pleased in this moment. That makes sense? All right, if I didn't define it well enough. So, what's toe for people? Let's get one or two here.
Our group here said that teaching was our toe.
Awesome.
Dave, get some on mine too.
So for our group, it was definitely the idea of being able to listen and speaking on behalf of those who don't have a voice and entering into situations where there's a lot of pain and trying to help put things back together.
Beautiful.
From those online, we have some folks that find that, I mean, even researching, getting facts, it's something that they've always loved to do. Others preaching, showing up, kind of your example of listening, being non-judgmental in pastoral care is somebody's, Susan's tove.
That's awesome. Well, so as you'll notice, there's a huge variety, and that's the beauty of God's kingdom in this body of Christ, is that God uses all these different toves to bring God's goodness into the world. And so Howard Thurman says this. If you haven't read Howard Thurman, I recommend it. He's a great theologian. He brings this contemplative spirit, which I really appreciate. He says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are alive, right? And I just think that God is pleased when we are alive, when we're in our sweet spot. And the way that I like to talk about this is our job versus our work. So if you look at the word job, the etymology means, it originally comes from an Old English word, gob, G-O-B-B-E. Back in the day, you used to get paid for, your wage came from the amount of stuff that you were able to move. So it's like, okay, you moved this many lumps of coal, and here's your wage. It was based on that, and that's where that word comes from. So, so if you have a job, you have a lump of something, right? We've all had jobs, right? I worked at Sprint for, evil multinational corporation. No, I'm just kidding. But I had to try to find, it was a job, right? So I had to figure out, how could I find meaning beyond just the stuff that I was moving around every day? Well, the word work, the etymology comes from the word erg. So do we have any like physics nerds in the house? Something is ergonomic, right? It's about movement of energy. And we would say, as people of faith, we would say it's about movement of the spirit, right? And so you have your stuff, right? That's your job. But then you have this movement of the spirit that's happening. That's your work. And that goes much deeper. So your job will change on average, they say like now 17 times. Some people would say even more. Your job will change a lot throughout your life. But your work, it probably won't change a whole lot. That deep core of who you are is probably not going to change a lot. The gifts that you bring right now to being a student are probably a lot of the same gifts you're going to bring as you go and, whether you do a first call as a minister, whether you go to a nonprofit. For me, I've had many different jobs. I've been a teacher, camp counselor, coach, rapper, workshop facilitator, seminary person. My work has never really changed a whole lot. My work has been about connecting people to each other and to God. That's been my work. And so, and it's funny how we always try to get everybody to focus on their job. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And we don't focus on their work. Who are you going to be? Like, who are you? And how are you going to bring that into wherever you end up? It relieves the pressure in a way to know that you can do this work from a lot of different places. Like I said, in the Sprint job where, I was answering phones and people were angry and they're swearing at me. You guys are horrible. And my job was like, you know what? I'm going to connect this person to God. I'm not going to speak God's name, but I'm going to be compassionate towards them. I'm going to listen to them. Hopefully by the end of this conversation, they're going to know that they're cared for. So I was able to do my work even in this job that was kind of crummy. So that's the key, is who do we want to be when we grow up, right? How do we want to bring all of our gifts to this work so that we can discover our Tov? Now, the magic intersection for us hopefully will come when our Tov intersects with, I call it like our orge in Greek, or sa'ak in Hebrew, which is this righteous cry of anger. Like, God, how long, O Lord? And each one of us has a different sa'ak. Each one of us has something that we cry out and we say, God, somebody do something about this. And each one of us, that's wired differently too. So not only are our gifts different, but our passions are different as well. So the question is, how are we going to aim those gifts so that we can bring more flourishing to God's cosmos? That's the question. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to do whatever you do, to put your whole self into it, not for others, but to serve the living God. And I leave you with this Dr. King quote, which I really appreciate. And I know Martin Luther had similar sensibilities when he talked about vocation. He said that if a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all of the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. And I would say who did his work well. Amen. So to talk more about this, we have my amazing colleague, the ever so positive, alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic herself, Miss Karen Gieseke, ladies and gentlemen.
thank you for engaging in that camp song. I know my children's ears were ringing and they weren't sure why, but that's because we would do that all the time at home and they thought it was awesome. So thank you for joining us. So, Dave just did a really awesome job of setting up this conversation that we want to have. I love the creation story because over and over we see how God took chaos and made beauty and says it is good. And to think about the uniqueness of every one of you showing up as God, whatever you're doing. This great quote up here about the street sweeper, that movie that Dave was referencing, Chariots of Fire. There's a quote in there too where one of the characters says, if you peel potatoes, peel them to perfection. It's the daily stuff. And I know I get caught up in it. There's days where I'm like, how come I'm not out, bigger, better? But what does bigger, better mean, right? Because I get to hang out with all of you guys. And when we talk about that work, this is so not work for me. Because as a developer, as someone who has this just calling, nurturing feeling of wanting to help each of you develop, to unpack this with you, this is my best morning ever, you guys. So thanks for being here. So we're going to talk about you. I give you permission for the next hour to just be totally selfish and think about you. Because eventually we're going to talk about how this translates to all that other work you're going to do with and alongside your colleagues and your parishioners and your community. But right now we're just going to think about you. So go ahead and just take a deep breath and just be present, knowing you're a beloved child of God, created in God's image. So we have this conversation about talent. We had a couple examples of Michelangelo and Dave was talking about different musical talents. I don't know about you, but I was not someone who ever thought of myself going on one of the reality TV shows for talent. I love music. I sing in the car, right? I love listening to my kids play their instruments. I was really good at writing the check for their lessons. Not so skilled in the actual presentation of it, right? Does that mean I'm not talented? Not at all. And so one of the things that for me is important for all of us to understand is that culture sometimes tells us what talent looks like. And these are all beautiful ways that people express themselves. But I know I wasn't in a talent show ever where I sang or danced or any of those kind of things. Because there wasn't a category in a talent show that asked, are you the world's best developer? Are you the world's best analyst? Are you the world's best empathetic person? So we have categories that sometimes culture has told us this is what talent looks like, and I'm going to break that open for you guys big time. Okay? So set that idea aside that to have talent you had to sing or dance or be an artist, because talent shows up as a child of God, creating God's image in so many amazing ways. And that's what we want to talk about today, what your talent is. So this whole Gallup conversation has multiple resources that are really awesome. And this is one that Gallup developed along with some theologians, because there were faith-based communities who said, you know what, this is a really great conversation. And in this book, Living Your Strengths, this is one of the quotes that is used for us to unpack this. So would you in the room and online read this with me, please? From a spiritual viewpoint, when we deny our talents and instead focus on our weaknesses, we are telling God that we know best. And that God is somehow praising us for our unique gifts and talents. All right, you guys are good. Thanks for hanging in there. A little technical difficulty here, but we'll fix that real fast. There we go. So what do you think when you hear that? What do you think when you hear that? That you're telling God, this is good, this is not good? It's in your, if you picked up a handout. We're telling God that we know best and that God somehow made a mistake. Well, I don't want to be the person who does that. Right? And sometimes this is hard to do because depending again on the culture that you've grown up in, if you're like me, we weren't supposed to boast, right? And that's even in scripture, like don't, be a humble person, humility. So is talking about what you do well boastful? Or is it this opportunity to name and claim how God created you? Name and claim how God created you. Because besides all the obvious physical characteristics that are different, your spirit is different than the person next to you by design. And we can't necessarily put words, we can't talk about eye color, hair color when we talk about your spirit. But God designed you unique because God needed you to be that image of God in the world. And don't ever let anybody else tell you anything other than that, okay? So if you have the handout, I invite you to look at the next slide. And there's a couple verses in scripture in the Old Testament that I just love. And for me to live into these and for you to think about living into those is just a gift that I think you can give to yourself and to others around you. So this first one comes from Jeremiah. Would you read it with me, everyone, please? Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. That's God talking to every one of you. Every one of you in the womb, before anyone else had a clue, maybe a hope, a wonder, but God knew. And secondly, in Psalm 139, would you read this with me too, please? If you have your handout, you'll be able to read it. So, for it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. And what I want us to zoom in on today is that last phrase, wonderful are your works, God. Remember, God uses words, right? Wonderful are your works, God, your creation, your work, that I know very well. And so that's why today you get to be selfish for a little while and think about yourself so that you can get to know yourself, maybe with some new lenses, some new words, some new understandings of how you live and how you lead. And maybe you haven't thought about it that way before. Maybe you see others as being the leader and you're the follower. And yes, that's theologically correct too, that we're followers. But every one of you has potential to lead. So we want to understand what that looks like and sounds like. There's a Jewish sort of a parable, fable kind of story out there that in a nutshell, towards the end of the story, as this person is unpacking, like, what is my role in this journey? Who am I? What am I supposed to be? And towards the end of this story, as this person is unpacking this, the story goes, the gentleman who's asking the question to the main character says, in the coming world, they will not ask me, why were you not Moses? They will ask me, why were you not, insert your name. And that's not the conversation I want to have when I get to the pearly gates or whatever color they are, right? I want to be able to say I understood enough about who I was that I can with confidence say, yeah, I get it. This is how you made me, God, and this is how you need me to be. Because I'm never going to be Dave or Tim or Marcia or any of you. I'm Karen. Because God needs me to be Spirit of Karen. So again, part of how you are formed is not in a vacuum, but it's part of culture. It's part of society. And we happen to be in a place and space in our culture where oftentimes we are stuck on weaknesses. And I know I go there sometimes in my head, you know, if I haven't had enough caffeine or I'm overtired or, you know, like I focus on all the things I didn't get done or I'm not up to for the day, right? I get stuck in that weakness thing. And our culture feeds that. We've also had a culture that for a while has been telling us, you can be anything you want to be. Just go for it. I am all about experiential learning and trying things and learning because I do discover my basketball career peaked in 4th grade because I was this height and all of my fellow students were like this tall, right? So I could just stand there and keep shooting because they couldn't get the ball. I couldn't get any taller. So I really couldn't be anything I wanted to be. Now, did I have fun running around on the court and trying to figure out how to dribble? Well, I did, yeah. But I am not going to ever be a basketball player. And then we have these conversations, and I think about, so my 2 kids are launched now, but I think about when they were going through junior high and high school, et cetera, and they were developing their resume for college, right? And you were supposed to have a bazillion things on your resume of all the stuff you did because the colleges wanted to see that you had tried 24 different activities. You're supposed to be this really well-rounded person, right? Again, totally about experiential learning because I grow and learn every time I try something new and different, right? But is it really about being this well-rounded person or employee or student? And sometimes our culture has told us that's what you want to be. You want to be able to do a little bit of everything. And I'm going to push back and say, again, experiences are good. But as Dave was talking about job and work and where your essence is, I don't think we can be any one of us can be the fullness of who God is. Right? We've got those threads of God woven through us that are beautiful. So let's live into those in a way that honors God's work in the world. So one of the ways we're going to do that we want to give you language and tools and resources, is this tool called the StrengthsFinder. What I love about StrengthsFinder is they want to talk about what's right with people. That's what their conversation has been. And they've been doing it around the world. This is a global conversation that Gallup helps facilitate. There have been over 10 million people who have participated in assessments after this course. Now you guys were up to like 10 million and 50 or something, right? Because you've been part of the assessment. What I love is that it's not just like take the assessment and we're done. They've been working on this since 2001. They continue to expand and create resources, but they've incorporated all of this cool understanding of brain physiology and how different parts of the brain light up when different things happen. And so they've been talking to people like you and me, but they've been talking to researchers and asking them, let's watch people's brain when they get to be in their toes and see what happens that's different. And so I'm grateful to be able to say with confidence that this is I think, a reliable conversation for us to have. And what I mentioned before is that Gallup has been doing this for so long that not only do they have your basic StrengthsFinder, but they have this strengths-based leadership, which you use. They have the Living Your Strengths, which is the faith-based tool. They continue to unpack in schools, in universities, and now seminaries and churches. What does this look like and sound like so that your people can be doing their best work, be their best essence? And I love that that's what their focus is this positive understanding of what people bring to their journey. Instead of talking about the deficits and when we need to have more training and we need to improve that person, what do you do well? And let's celebrate that. But first we have to know what it is. So when you took your assessment, even though the book is called StrengthsFinder, if you got your report, it talked about 5 talent themes, correct? Okay. So what I want to unpack with you for just a minute before we dive a little further into this language is what do they mean by talent? Because like I said, they're not talking necessarily about your athletic talent or your artistic talent or your musical talent. How are they unpacking talent? And this is how Gallup suggests talent looks and sounds and feels. Is that talent is this naturally recurring. See that first word, natural. Without even thinking, it happens, you guys. It's this naturally recurring pattern of thought, of feeling, or of behavior. Thought, feeling, or behavior. So those things that people say to you, oh, you do that so well. And you're like, I don't know, it just happened. And they're like, no, you're so good at that. And you say, really, it's not a big deal. Well, it is, because the person next to you doesn't have that natural talent, but you do. And so, again, a little different take on talent. And they want you to first understand that this is, again, your talent. We're not quite there to talk about it being a strength yet. That takes a little extra intentionality. So, what are your talents? Okay? We're going to zip through real quickly the 34 possible talent themes. And if you don't have your 5 already in front of you in some way, shape, or form, now would be a really good time to remind yourself what your 5 are. And as we get to the one, I'm going to just, again, zip through the slides. Name that it's your talent by going woohoo or raising your hand or something, okay? We want to hear who's got what talent in the room. So, here we go, guys. Achiever. Achiever, great stamina. Activator, adaptability. Analytical, arranger, belief, command, communication, competition, connectedness, consistency, context, deliberative, developer, discipline, empathy, focus, futuristic, harmony, ideation, includer, individualization, input, intellection, learner, maximizer, positivity, relator, responsibility, restorative, self-assurance, significance, strategic, and woo. Yay. Good job. All right, that was a fast pace, but that's all right. Here's our next step, you guys. We all got a strip of stickers, right? There's 5 stars, because you guys are all rock stars, right? We're about to bling. Here's what I need you to do. And those of you who are online, I need you to shoot them to our online facilitators. Those of you who are here, grab your sticker strip. See how there's 34 themes up on the wall? Go put a sticker on each one of your 5. So you should have 5 different sheets of paper where you're putting your stickers. Again, online people, shoot yours in here and we will put them up on the wall for you.
Or just grab some stickers. We'll divvy it up. Okay.
Here, I'll write it down to write.
Oh, good idea. You can write.
Yeah, all right. And then Erica, you'll have a sure.
Big grandpa, theme pages. And just put it-
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you just doing that? Yeah. We'll take it. Make sure you all are coordinated with your sisters. Because she's just checking. Oh.
I'm just gonna do a bunch. How about that?
How we do it? Yay, we love positivity. All right, let's just go with these. All right, very good. All right, so our online rock stars are being added to the list. For those of you who are in the room, so somebody, we'll just pass this around and go ahead and shout out a couple that there's lots of stickers on today. Go ahead. Oh. See one of them that has a lot of stickers?
Yes, empathy.
Empathy, very good. All right, what's another one that has a lot of stickers?
Connectedness.
Connectedness.
Intellection seems to have a few.
Yeah. All right, what's another one? Where should I go?
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's so nice. That's so nice of you. How about developer? Looks like there's a lot there.
There's a lot of that. And then there's a couple that right now don't have any. Right now we have no consistency, you guys. And we have no significance. Oh, we got an individualization. There we go.
I'm one.
Oh, good. Yeah, I have a maximizer too. So one of the things that becomes important as we start to live into this idea of knowing yourself, knowing these works that God made very well, is to give ourselves some language to talk about how you show up. And so a couple of these words are made up words, like who actually stands for winning others over. And maximizer and ideation are kind of made up words. But they're meant to describe how you do life naturally. And one of the things that StrengthsFinder talks about is that while we have a list of 34 themes up there, you all have capacity to do all of them. You can all do these things, but which ones do you do naturally? And so when you take this assessment by forcing you to answer quickly, did any of you notice that? That like you didn't have a lot of time to think about it? They want you to come up with what's on the top of your head. That natural thing that shows up. And so if you like had to think about it longer, guess what? That wasn't a natural thing for you. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it didn't show up as just boom, boom, boom. Gallup suggests that when you look at all 34 of these, if you were to get your full list, which by the way, you can do that, it does cost a little bit of extra money, but you can go back in. You don't have to retake the assessment. They have all 34 of yours in order. What they suggest is that this is actually kind of like a 3-drawer dresser. And that approximately the top third are in that top drawer. And if you're like me, the things that I use a lot, I put in the top drawer, right? And then that middle approximate third are what they suggest are your supporting. Yeah, you use them. You know, maybe it's that favorite t-shirt that you don't wear every day, but you wear it a lot. And then the bottom drawer are the things that, yeah, you can do, but it takes more effort. You have to reach down and pull them out. And if you ever want to have that conversation about what this looks like, please know that both myself and my colleague Nancy Lee Gaucher, who works in CYF here at Luther, we love to meet with you guys for a half an hour, hour-long coaching, whatever works. Just email us and we'll do that. But to talk about what these actually look like in life for you can be really helpful. Yeah.
Just a quick online question from somebody who wants to do this with her whole staff and wondering if there's a budget-friendly way to do that.
Why don't they email me and I'll chat with them about that. Yep, great. It does become helpful to have this common language. And so for you, doing your CPL, your precept leader has access to this tool too, okay? So as you start to think about your papers and all that kind of stuff, just know that you don't need to do this alone, that besides your colleagues in this room, your precept leaders have access to this. I have access, you know, my team in contextual learning, we all live and breathe this stuff. Part of what, when we think about this naturally recurring kind of experience, again, how does it become a strength? And here's what Gallup would suggest you need to do, as with anything, whether you're shooting basketball hoops or you're painting or whatever, you take that natural talent, you start adding knowledge, which you're doing today, and you start putting some skills in place. What does this really look like in the day-to-day work? And then you practice it. There's the intentionality piece. You start to practice it. So you take it from just being this thing that you do to you're actually intentionally practicing that particular talent. And sometimes these things are so natural that you're just living them and you don't even know that it's showing up in the room. And the people around you, if you take your assessment and you share it with someone who knows you well, and you say, do you agree with any of this? And I'd be willing to bet you a coffee that they will point to things and go, oh my gosh, that is totally you. This is exactly how you do life. And you'll be like, really? Can you give me a story? And they'll be able to give you a story. And my colleagues have heard this a number of times, but I'm sure to get it anyway. So my husband and I, when we got married, we made a commitment to do family finance meetings on a
Still
regular
my favorite
basis.
story.
And so we did that. We were being, you know, good married couple, and let's do the family finance meetings. And we did them regularly, and we would sit down together. We didn't have kids yet. And Mark would come to the meeting, because we would do it like Monday nights. That was our meeting night, every other Monday night. And he would bring charts. He would bring budget charts. And at first I was like, oh, wow, this is great, you know. And then pretty soon I'm like, okay, there's 2 of us here. Charts, really? And he's like, yeah, totally. And so we would do charts. And then like if I had a long, hard day, sometimes I didn't really appreciate his charts, right? You know, I'm like, I don't feel like this doesn't look that much different than last time, right? But he would always bring the charts. I'm like, okay, whatever. When Mark and I both did our strengths assessment a number of years ago, and we sat down with our top 5, and we were looking at them and reading them. One of Mark's is analytical. And in his description, it actually said, you see the world through charts. And I looked at him and I said, seriously? And he's like, doesn't everyone? And he was serious. He was totally serious. I'm like, no. But all of a sudden, it changed my relationship with him because we had this common language and I understood that this was how he did life. And I grew to appreciate his charts. I also have ideation, which he learned to love more than he had in the past. And he started making his charts different from week to week and in color. And he totally fed into my ideation, which I appreciate. But it makes a difference, you guys. To be able to name for each other and with each other those things that you're just doing and you like didn't even realize that that's how you're showing up, right? And so, you know, Tim's out of the room. Tim has input. Tim is all about collection, right? If you read input is all about collecting, whether it's collecting little trinkety things or articles or even relationships. Tim is always feeding me articles because I love to read and research. And he's like, Karen, you got to see this next one, right? And we know that that's how Tim does life, right? He just collects those things. So to be able to—
He can't help himself. It's
No,
like a drug.
It's natural. Again, it's this natural behavior of his because that's how he does life. So for you to think about that and to get some feedback from those around you about, do you really see this in me? Because sometimes we get those assessments, we're like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I see that. Or the other thing that happens is people will say, I didn't get the ones I wanted. Can I retake it and get some different ones? So here's what I'll tell you about retaking it, because Gallup does not encourage you to do that. But as someone who did retake it 3 times because of either changes in jobs or things that I was doing in my vocation, I did end up taking it 3 times. And here's what I learned. There were a couple that always showed up in the top 5. There was no doubt about it. They were always there. And then I had a couple that kind of moved in and out. So a couple things I learned was, one, by the 3rd time I took it, I knew what was coming and I could manipulate it, which that was not good. So I'm like, stop doing that. So that's one of the reasons, if you get too familiar, you can start, you know, like, oh, I want to be that instead. That's not helpful. The other thing that I learned is that once you get at least your top 10 or your top, or you get all 34, those ones that kind of moved in and out, they were all in my top drawer. And depending on the context of what I was doing right at that moment in my life, there might have been a slight shift in how that showed up. So for instance, the time when I took it with a congregation where I was doing interim work, there was incredible grief and loss in the congregation. And empathy showed up in my top 5. Now I know that's in my top 10, but because right then so much of my day was spent listening to grief and loss, it had moved up a little bit. The other thing that Gallup will tell you is that they don't tell you the distance between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're really not as concerned about like this is number 1 and this is number 2, because it could be that they all were really basically the same, or they might have been a distance, but this is what you do naturally. Okay, so if you ever want to understand more of the brain physiology stuff, I can have that conversation with you. But for starters, it's good to lean into these 5. Because that's where you are now. Those were the things that naturally came to you in this first flush of this assessment. So one of the handouts that I is posted online and also that I had when you walked in is this handout that's called Bring Need. And I'd love for you to look at that for just a moment. Because as we start to learn about ourselves and we're able to start thinking about these talent, knowledge, skills, practice kind of experience, I find these additional layers of awareness really helpful. So under this Bring Need, what they're suggesting that they've learned is that, for instance, as someone who has developer, what I bring is a commitment, both time and energy, to human growth. That's why I love being here with you guys, right? And what I need is someone to invest in, like all of you. So to know that about yourself, if you're in a job where you don't have that need filled, your energy is going to be tapped in a different way. When I walk out of here today, I'll be good for the rest of the day, because this is like awesome for me, right? These are the places where energy is either growing or energy is tapped. So if you have just in your head, think of one of your top 5 that you're like super excited about, and look at the bring need. And think about some of your work, whether it's paid work, volunteer work, family, whatever, and see if you can locate how that bring piece or that need piece are being fed or not fed. Okay? So just take a moment and look at one of yours and think about how is that being energized or having energy zapped from it. That's when you get to start paying attention. As Dave was saying, you know, he had to have a job, and so he had to work at Sprint for that chapter in his life, right? So sometimes we don't always get to pick the job that totally fuels us. Sometimes we do have to pay the bills, right? So A, you get to figure out, how do I bring my natural talent to this? Or B, where in my life am I getting energy? And how do I make sure that somewhere in my life, if it's not in my paying job, but it's in my volunteer or my relationships or somewhere, I'm finding that space and place where I'm getting that energy. Because I trust fully that God's desire for you is to have the most abundant life possible. And by abundant, I mean that there's joy in your day, that you're living into God's work in a way that serves others and energizes you so that you can keep doing that work on behalf of God. So this idea about identifying your talents becomes a key part of this. And that's what we're doing today with this assessment, is we're starting to identify and giving some names, and we're claiming who we are. The things that are on that bottom of the 34, that bottom drawer, you do have to manage those, right? You don't get to go back to your boss or your precept leader and say you got your full 34 and you go to them and okay, true disclosure, analytical is in my bottom drawer. I still, in my job, have to know how to read budget charts, right? I can't go to my boss and say, yeah, it's not in my top drawer, I'm not doing that, right? So I have to figure out how to manage them. I also have to know that if I don't pay attention, they can start to take over, right? And they may not be an asset to the conversation. As someone who has ideation, I have no trouble coming up with new possibilities, right? It's like the best thing ever. If all I do is come to meetings and conversations with ideas and don't do anything more than that, I maybe am not managing them. And so one of the other handouts we have, the one that's called Balcony and Basement, can be a tool that helps you think about the managing of your natural talents. And the balcony talks about how you show up when you are in a space and place where you can totally rock your talent, right? Where you can totally be absorbed in it. The basement is when we aren't paying attention. When we aren't using those talents in the best way possible. And they're maybe getting a little bit too much of the oxygen in the room, or a little bit too much of the space in the work that needs to be done. So part of being a good leader is this self-awareness, knowing how to ask good questions and how to live into your natural talents. So, quick break here. Questions, thoughts, comments, either online or from anybody in the room about any of this up to this point.
I have a question. Let's see what the point is.
All right, question.
Well, the question basically is when you talk about are we not trying to tell God that he made a mistake along the line? What I'm trying to say here is that there is that in between time where you know that you are talented but not too sure, and you need that time to progress from your doubtfulness. Is that also telling you that God is being denied in our process? I know I'm talented, but I'm not too sure I can take it to the next level. And so I'm slack in that area, and I'm not going up and I'm not coming down, and I'm just in between. Am I telling God that He made a mistake in that process, or am I just trying to reassure myself?
Do you have an answer for that, or you just?
No, I just want to know, because sometimes we stay right there and we don't move up and we don't move down. We just there, but we don't make progress on what God has given us.
Right. And I would say your reflection on that is really, really good insight, because you're right. We can show up. Again, like you can be a basketball player who is good at what you do. You can be a runner, you can peel potatoes, and it's adequate. But if you're not working to improve that, is that kind of doing the same thing as denying it? I think it could be. Yeah. Now, do I have capacity every day to think about all of these and figure out how they show up? Nope. I think that's another reason why we start out with 5. So that's manageable. In honesty, most of us can do 2 to 3 things at a time well. So after today, if like you're thinking about your 5 and there's like 1 or 2 that you want to really start digging into, I think that's the best way to go about it. Start 1 or 2. How does this look? What might this be? And your reflection papers that you're going to be writing are a great way to start unpacking that. And you can name all 5, but maybe you're going to find that these are the ones in this particular context or this story where I can really start living into it. Yeah.
Karen, a couple things online. One is what happens when you're in an environment where you're kind of the outlier, like your strengths are really opposite. So if you would mind talking to that, and also a sense of the appreciation of doing this in a work environment or ministry setting where you have a shared language. So maybe talking about how to work in teams when like one's more of a negative, or when it's kind of a hard thing, and one is like, how can this help teams sail?
Yeah, awesome questions. And I'm gonna hold the team one to the side for just a moment because we're gonna dive into that. But yeah, what if you feel like the other people in your posse, your group, your team, your whatever, are like totally opposite of you? What does that look like and sound like? Has anybody had that experience themselves that they can think of? Okay. Okay. All right.
Okay, so just from my perspective, I think it can kind of work 2 ways. First of all, if you are self-aware and you know like what your strengths are, you should be able to go into your team and just say, you know what, I think about this differently because, and then you can name that. If you don't have that relationship within your team, however, it's not going to work well for you. So in my context, I guess we look at the diversity of strengths as diversity of experience, and so we each bring something different to the table. And it is part of our like working agreement, especially now as we're really embracing strengths of our coworkers, to know, identify, and our responsibility by knowing our own strengths is to know others and to be able to lift them up in theirs as well. And so with that, we can call them on, hey, what if you tried it this way? Because your strength is this, and I feel like you're working against that, or, whatever. I mean, that to me, that's kind of an optimal way of doing it. And the reality is that's not how everybody works. But to be able to work in that is total gift. I mean, it's really, really just such a blessing.
So you may be in a space and a place where people are bringing their full selves too. And they have been part of family systems. They've been a part of a culture that maybe has not talked about this in any way, shape, or form. You know, sometimes we enter into a system where there's not a curiosity about understanding us as individuals, or there maybe has been this idea that you just keep working harder and you do your job, and those are the kind of voices that are amongst your teammates. And so how do you break into that in a way that keeps you part of a team, but doesn't, you know, potentially alienate somebody? So one thing that you can do just to even start introducing this concept, because not everyone is curious about this. Not everyone feels like they have time or energy for this. Really, we're going to do one more thing. We really don't have time for that. So what are some small steps that you can do to start at least owning your own? So one example that I've used in the past is I make little signs that I can put on my desk or outside my door of my office or wherever I'm working. And you can just make a little tent card. And you put your name and your 5 strengths on them, your 5 talent themes. And you put them on both sides, right? Because then when it's sitting on my desk or my table, and someone's sitting across from me, they can see my 5, and I'm reminded on the backside of what my 5 are. And oftentimes, depending on the curiosity of the people you're working with, they might say, oh, what is that? Those are kind of crazy words. I've never heard that one before. And so you get to start help teaching others about this. Another really simple way, again, to just start naming and claiming, which you guys already started doing by putting up your rock star stickers. You named and claimed your talent, whether you do it or not. On your, if you have an email address, or I mean an email that you use, if you have a signature line, if you go look at mine, I've got my 5 strengths across the bottom. And so you can start finding little ways to infuse this into your daily life that you can start trying it on with your coworkers. Is every team going to be excited about this the way I am? Probably not. Call me. I'll help them get excited. But the bottom line is that all you can do is own your own stuff, right? And you can plant seeds, and you can offer opportunities for your colleagues to be curious. Whether they are or not is not something you can own, but you can start doing things for yourself, right? You can make your little signs, you can whatever. My daughter did a J-term internship at Best Buy corporate headquarters. It was like 3 weeks. It really wasn't that long of an internship, right? So the company's investment in her was really pretty minimal. The first day she was there, because they believe so deeply in strengths and why it matters, the first day she was there, they had her do her strengths assessment. And when she, during those 3 weeks, sat in on meetings and got to know the corporate headquarters, which is down on 494 in Bloomington in the Twin Cities, every person had these posted outside of their cubby. And in the meetings, when they would sit there, they would call each other's strengths out and go, oh, you know what, you're really good at this. You should take this part of the project. So it was part of their common language within that team. My point to that being that even though their investment with her was really super marginal, they understood on a deeper level that she was going to impact the world somewhere. And they wanted her to know about herself, even in that short amount of time. So think about what this might, transitioning a little bit away from yourself, but thinking about the leadership piece and the team building piece. Think about the impact that you might make in someone else's life by just starting to name your own talents and them saying, well, wait, what are mine? And you get to talk about it with them. Because they may have been in a space and place, a family system, a culture, where that wasn't how they were honored. That they never had the opportunity to have somebody care enough about them, even if it was just a glimpse. You know, your time in your CPL sites, for many of you, is a pretty small part of the week, right? Minimum 5 hours. But what happens if you start talking about this, even just in those 5 hours? Or maybe it's not even CPL right now, maybe it's with your friends or your family. I had a friend who Our sons were the same age, growing up together. They were best buds. They still are. And they each took, there's actually different strengths assessments for different age groups, which is one of the reasons I love this. You can start as early as middle school age. But our boys were about 14, and I knew that Laura was having her son do it too. And she called me, and I knew it was her because I saw the number. And I picked it up, and I was like, hi. And she's like, I'm not going to have to kill him. Hi, Laura, who are we talking about? And she's one of those people who can like just say things really bluntly and it works for her. I couldn't do it. She was talking about her son, Matt, because he had done the assessment, and 2 of his top 5 were analytical and deliberative. And she had spent the first 14 years of his life with, no matter what she said, Matt, let's go get in the car. Well, I don't know. Do we have everything we need in the car? Did you fill it up with gas? Do we have, Matt, get in the car. And she felt like everything had been this like, oh my gosh, why is he challenging me? Well, he was naturally asking, he was analyzing, he was like, do we have it all? And so all of a sudden it shifted for her how she showed up with him. So to be able to help him name and claim, this is how you show up, fully shifted. So it wasn't even, it wasn't a workplace, it wasn't a course, it was just in family life. I love this quote. I found it a number of years ago, and it's my go-to. Please read it with me. You owe it to us all to get on with what you are good at. Amen. It is about you, but it's not about you. We do life in community. We are leaders in community. God needs you. Your people need you to do what you do best as much of the time as you can. Again, sometimes I have to do budget sheets. Expense sheets are like my worst day ever. I love. Can I find a way for more of my day to be in those talents that energize me so that when I have to do those other things, I have the capacity to do it? So we're going to shift a little bit to the leadership piece, which is going to tap into the team stuff that was asked online. So why do we even talk about leadership? So a couple years ago, Gallup came up with this strengths-based leadership book, and this was a game changer for me. As someone who loves leadership conversations, who loves developing people, etc. So why? Why would we focus on leadership specifically? Sometimes we've had voices or stories that make us think that a leader looks a certain way, that they act a certain way, that they have to have a certain skill set. And what they're suggesting is not that at all. What they're suggesting is that there are more differences than similarities when we talk about leadership. I don't need you all to be ministry leaders and look alike. I need you to show up. God needs you to show up the way God wired you, and to use those. These 2 individuals, Gandhi and Churchill, how different could you get, right? Different styles of leadership, but both of them had incredible impact in the context and the chapter of God's story when they were there. We need to become aware. We've got stories in the Bible all over you guys. Leaders who look remarkably different and also understood that they didn't do this alone, right? They brought people around them. We aren't meant to do this alone, but I have to know what I do bring well, right? So as part of this leadership piece, what Gallup suggested from their work was that there's 4 kinds or styles or themes of leadership. And this is one of the handouts that you got, plus it's a slide on the PowerPoint. They suggest that out of those 34, all of them will fall under one of these domains, these styles, these ways of doing leadership. Executing, they suggest, are those people who know how to make it happen, right? Influencing, those are like our salespeople, right? They're out there talking about it, they take charge, they want things heard. They're communicators. Relationship building. They're the people who are going to just love on everybody. They're going to build those networks. They're going to be the relational people in the group. And then the strategic thinking people are those who are going to know how to connect the dots. I'm going to help us get from A to B to C to D. Now, if you look at your 5 and you locate them on the chart, you may find that you have a whole blending of leadership styles. You may find that you have a bunch in one, and then this one over here on the other side. And that's all good. The beauty is that you can start, again, to understand what this looks like when you come together with others. I have a lot in relationship building and strategic thinking. That's where a lot of my top drawer land. Those are natural things for me. The influencing, not much at all. Okay? How much better is it for me to know that when I'm sitting in a meeting or with a team, and I understand that this selling piece is not going to come naturally to me. Now, if I'm on a team, but I know it has to happen, right? Because it's part of the plan, I'm going to have to maybe pull from something else of mine to figure out how to make it work if no one else on the team has that natural talent. So you don't get to like just ignore it. But how great is it to start building your teams and the energy in the team around what people do naturally and help them be their best? You know, sometimes we end up doing work out of scarcity rather than abundance. There's a great story in the Living Your Strengths book that has to do with some new members in a church, and you know, they were being welcomed in and they were joining, and the pastor said, hey, we need hospitality people, welcoming people. Do you want to do that? And it was a couple, and one of the couple, the wife said, oh yeah, we're going to do that. And like she was all on board and her husband wasn't, but he did it for a while, and then he's like, I'm done with it. Well, when they went back and started learning about their talents and their strengths, they realized that she was totally in the relationship building leadership piece, right? And like he had nothing up there. So it's not that he couldn't, but it wasn't energizing for him. Sometimes in our work, in our congregations, we come at this from a scarcity standpoint. And not that our people aren't generous and willing, but how much more fun is it to be asked to do something because somebody noticed how well you do something? Instead of saying, oh, we need 4 more people on the committee to plan the event. And no one even acknowledges what your talents are. It's just filling a vacancy. How much more fun is it to say, you know what I noticed about you the last couple of weeks when I saw you was that when you greet people, you just light up. And I need 2 people. Yeah, I know. I need 2 people to just stand at the door and greet. Could you do that? I mean, that feels, to me, that feels way different than saying, I have scarcity. Could you fill the plugs, right? So we get to think about this and build our teams and know this about ourselves. And here's this common language piece. And one of the questions online was like, what does this look like for a team, for a staff, whether it's lay people, whether it's paid people? When you start to have this common language, it shifts the work that you do together. Because you're all starting to understand what this looks like and means. But it takes time to get a language into a culture, right? So you guys are getting the first seeds and we're planting them today and hopefully they're taking root. But we can do this, you guys. There's like over 10 million people around the globe who have done this, right? And I can tell you there's beautiful stories in some of these books of how it starts to shift and change. Whether, again, it's in your own personal relationships or whether it's with the work. And it's God's work that we're trying to focus on here. And this really isn't a new tool, you guys. We talk about this in scripture all the time. You know, we read from Jeremiah, we read from Psalms, we read multiple places in the New Testament. Corinthians, it takes many parts. Right? You're not meant to be the full Mr. Potato Head or Mrs. Potato Head. You can, you know, you can have all those parts. We know that. Gallup says you have all 34. But what happens when you start to invite others to use their talents? I've had a few times in this conversation, especially because we have scripture that, you know, talks about being a humble servant and humility, and about how God is made strong through our weakness. And does this fly in the face of that? If I'm talking about my strengths instead of my weaknesses, am I somehow pushing against that theology? And I had that asked to me a number of times, and I kept wrestling with it. And here's where I landed with it. If I know myself well enough to know that, yeah, I can do all 34 when needed, but I know that these are the things I do really well and are going to energize me. And I know Dave does this other stuff really well, and it's going to energize him. And I let go of the things that are zapping me, right? That are taking away my energy. And I let Dave do it. Am I allowing the fullness of God to show up in a way that's not about me, but it's really about letting what God infused in each of us be our best? And then maybe that's how God is made strong, instead of us getting tapped to the point where we can't even show up because we're trying to do it all. So one more thing that I want you to think about with that in mind. Again, Gallup continues to unpack this idea of what happens when we focus on what people do well, instead of trying to fix them through more training. What happens if I know myself well enough that I can say these things in an articulate way with my colleagues, with my family? So one of the things that they continued to understand was, how does this affect your health? Does it? Here's what's fascinating. 25-year longitudinal study about when you had a self-aware presence, when you understood yourself, your positive aspects, the things that were natural to you, did it impact your physical health? And over that 25-year study, what they saw was that if you are struggling because you can't name and you aren't in a place where you can live into your strengths and your talents, that your health takes a beating. Think about it. When you have to do the work that just doesn't come naturally, how much more tired you are at the end of the day, right? But the days where you get to do the things that are just life-giving to you, how much the endorphins, I mean, it's the whole physiology thing. And that's what I love about this is talking about the fullness of who you are. Your spiritual self, your emotional self, your physical self. And if you guys burn out, if you go out and you're in a congregation or you're in a nonprofit or you're part of a family and you're exhausted because you can't name and claim and then aim your strengths, you're not going to even be around long enough to do God's work. And so again, whatever your vocation ends up being, and vocation for me is a really big umbrella. It's everything from peeling potatoes to preaching and everything in between. CEO of something, cleaning, sweeping streets, whatever. My desire and hope for you, and I know God's is way greater than mine, is for you to be as healthy holistically as you can for as long as you're needed in this journey.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said that.
There we go.
You said that if we feel burnout, means like we cannot name our strength. Is it always like that when we feel burnout with our work?
Well, I would say the question was, if you feel burnout, is it because you haven't been able to name your strengths? Is that accurate? I would not be so bold as to say that it can be totally about your strengths, because honestly, even the things that energize me, if I don't sleep, if I'm not having good boundaries, about what is realistic expectations of me, at some point, my Energizer Bunny taps out, right? And so part of this is helping frame up your days, because there will be days when you're not going to get to use your strengths as much. But how do you, again, this whole healthy boundaries kind of thing. I, myself as an example, will have way more energy multiple days in a row when I'm getting to do this kind of work. But I have my limits too. And so to know that about yourself, because you come as a whole person, and you have your ministry leader role, but you have family and you have friends and you have all these pieces that are important to who you are holistically. So this is a part. For me, this is one of those layers of who you are. It's not the only thing, and I don't want this to be like a labeling kind of thing. It is fun when you start to get familiar with this to be able to say, well, I'm an ideation or I'm positivity. Catherine Osley in our office, she's so excited because there are, what are we up to now, Dave? 1, 2, 3, 4 of us who have positivity. So every day is a party in the office, except for Catherine, who doesn't have positivity. And she's like, you guys are out of touch with reality. You're like, I know, isn't it great? But so it does help to like be able to name it in a playful way, but to honestly understand each other too. That it's not that Dave and I aren't taking life seriously, but at the same time, we don't stay there very long. It's like, okay, there's got to be a way here, you guys. There's got to be a way. A couple interesting nuggets, because Gallup continues to do this work. If you get to use your strengths all the time, meaning at least sometime during the day, you're 6 times more likely. 6 times more likely to be engaged. And if you're building a team and your team is developed and works around this idea of their talents, their strengths, they're suggesting that makes a significant difference in how productive you are. And I'll let you determine what that looks like for your work. But those are pretty significant numbers for me that make me want to pay attention to how this can shift and have things look different. Some more conversation about vocation. I'm sure you've heard this before, but Buchner talks about vocation is the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. If you are able to name and claim where your deepest gladness comes from, where you get your energy from, the places where God wired intentionally in you, as we heard way back in Jeremiah already. With intentionality, God took all those crazy cells and put them together and made you different from everybody else here. And that's the deep gladness that can serve the world and impact the world in an amazing way. So that's what we hope and dream and long for you, using this tool to unpack and understand and name and claim who you are. Questions? We've got a couple minutes yet before we're going to wrap up. Anything online or anybody in the room?
So you had talked about the friend that had the son.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there like a general age of like maturity that you would not use StrengthsFinder younger than?
Right. Yeah. So the Strengths Explorer, like I said, there's actually multiple iterations of it. The Strengths Explorer is meant, that's the very first one, and that's meant for kind of middle school age kids. And actually, when they take that assessment, there's not 34, there's only 10, because your brain isn't as developed yet. So there's not as much of the unique nuances. So middle school is kind of the earliest that you can start. It's a great tool, you guys, because instead of getting like the report like you did, it's geared towards the family. It's like, here's what it looks like in your family. And hey, parent, caregiver, here's some ideas of how your child could live this out. And hey, child, here's some ways that, I mean, it's really great. Like, and it gives you really specific, like, at school, you could do this. In your community, you could do that. So that's the first one. The next one, the Strengths Quest. And I think you're familiar with that, Marcia, maybe. It's more like high school, early college, and it actually is more about vocation and starting to understand yourself through vocation. So the book itself is written all from that context. My kids had a really amazing orchestra teacher when they were in high school. And he was the teacher that, like all the high school kids, if you were in orchestra, you went to him to write those reference letters for you for college, right? And he thought this was such an incredible, impactful tool that he would write letters for any and everybody. But before he would write the letter, he would hand them a Strengths Quest book, say, go take the assessment, and then we're going to meet for coffee, and I want to unpack with you what you learned about yourself, and then I'll write the letter. I mean, what a great investment. And a lot of colleges and schools are starting to use this. Here's the thing, you guys. Why are we letting the schools do this? I love school. I work in school, right? Why aren't we doing this in our churches, right? How cool would it be if our families and our kids understood that we cared enough about them to want to understand who they were as a beloved child of God, wired unique from everybody else in the room. And they could go say, you know what my church did? Like, they did this thing with me, and now I know that I'm a relator, learner, harmony maximizer. Cool. I mean, what a difference that can make for them to understand that we get it, that they are unique, and we want to celebrate them. Yeah, great. Any other questions?
We have a, let's see. So we do have a question about the reflective assessment, which will that'll be posted soon. Obviously, that's not due until December, and we don't want you to be doing too much of that until we're getting closer to the end of the semester. Some of you are just barely getting your feet wet. So, but that will be posted in the resources section, where the same place where the learning agreement was. So you can look for that. That was a question that came up.
So in terms of how might this look for you, again, first glance, just start to get familiar with it yourself and dig into one or two of them and just start to like try them on and get feedback from other people, like, how does this look? Do I do this? And then when you start to think about this upcoming paper that you're writing for this month and you start to put it into practice, take the time to think about what is different because you're now naming it through your strengths. What is different because you've been able to say, you know what, that day when I did this, I realized I was really tired at the end of the day. But then the day that I was asked to do this, or I volunteered to do this, I was able to be present so much differently, or something like that. But just, again, start trying to name and claim and aim these experiences through this lens, through this language. Again, if any of you ever want to like sit down and have a cup of coffee or just stop in the office for, you know, a half an hour or something, I would love to be able to do that with you. Don't hesitate to email me and ask, like you said, Nancy, we'll do it too, but we're here for you. So.
All right. Can we close by giving our thanks to Karen? Nice warm word of thanks. And let's close with a word of prayer and really give thanks, Karen, for your gifts of, well, positivity and developing your passion for the students as well. Let's pray. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to come together to learn. We pray that our roots may have grown just even an inch deeper in understanding more about ourselves and the mysterious and wonder of being created as unique gifts for this world. And we pray that you would fill us with a sense of direction and passion in terms of how we accompany others, how we pull out and tease out gifts in others. And we do all of this for your glory, giving thanks to you through Jesus our Lord. Amen. As we go on our way, again, CPL Chapel today is no joke, as is the event tonight around interfaith dialogue. And if you want to participate in that, we welcome you to chapel. Thanks.